On this episode of CrimCom Conversations, I talked to 4 early career researchers who have been really good at getting their research into the public eye, whether it be through their use of social media or their engagement with the press. We're talking to Andrea Headley from Georgetown University, Justin Nix from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, Natalie Todak from the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and Michael Sierra-Arévalo from UT Austin. I start the interview by asking each of the panelists what motivates them to be public criminologists. I hope you enjoy this as much as I did.
I don't know if I had a specific motivation aside from the fact that I went to get a PhD to kind of create research that would affect policing. But I think more for me, it just came naturally. I like to meet people. I like to talk to people about what I care about. And so, meeting people at conferences, talking to media, talking to people online just kind of became a part of my work. But I think the biggest thing for me is that I saw changes that I thought needed to be made. I sought out a degree in order to do that, and I just kind of kept working to put out the evidence as it came.
Okay, thanks. Michael, how about you?
I think that the motivation originally began when I was a graduate student, and I was struggling with what I think a lot of graduate students feel is that I'm toiling away in obscurity and no one has any idea what I'm doing. And I feel like what I'm doing is important, but I don't have a PhD yet. And so why won't anybody listen to anything that I'm saying? And so I was in a way sort of getting ahead of myself. The credential does matter and the expertise matters, but there are actually a lot of avenues to speak to people about what's going on. And it turns out that a lot of people with way less expertise say a lot of things about a whole lot of things. And so that was the initial motivation. I think as I've matured a little bit as a researcher, my public engagement comes from a sense of responsibility. I'm at a public institution. I came up through public institutions, and a lot of what we do as researchers is through public money. And so if we're not speaking to the public, or at least if I'm not speaking to the public in some way, it feels like I'm sort of falling short of what I view as a responsibility to give back to the people that are in some ways allowing me to do what I do.
Thank you. Andrea.
Yeah, so I definitely would agree, I think, with both Natalie and Michael. I would just add that for me, I've always been interested in community work, broadly speaking. And so even though I work with criminal justice agencies, for me, it's always thinking about the public, right? And improving services for the public. And while, of course, like we're all in academia, and so tenure matters. Well, Justin has tenure, but for the rest of us, tenure matters. And so there's publishing and academic journals, right? But the personal kind of what fulfills me is doing the work that I know speaks to the community. And one way I think that I feel like I've been able to at least feel like it matters a little bit more is kind of getting it out into the media, whether that's social media or news media or what have you. I think I would just kind of like echo the sentiment about feeling like there's a responsibility. Obviously, I'm not at a public institution, but I think the responsibility to serve communities that look like me is also kind of embedded in why I think doing this public-facing engagement is important.
Thank you. And Justin.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, for me, coming through grad school, I approached this job as, I'm just curious about the issues and I want to learn more. And, I was fortunate enough to have a survey in the field around the time that discussion about the Ferguson effect was starting to make national headlines. And so, one of my first papers was Scott Wolf. The APA put out a press release, and I just sort of was thrust into this world where reporters were asking me about my research, and I quickly realized that that was the way that we as criminologists can make an impact. And I agree with what Michael said and what Andrea said. It's our responsibility to speak to reporters and to speak to the public, right, about our data and the things, our studies, what we know about, right? And that's the way I think that we can have the biggest impact as a field. It's great and it's exciting to publish our research in academic journals, but I think we all know that that's really not an effective way to reach the public or policymakers or decision makers. So yeah, I agree with everything that's been said.
Right. So you're all busy. early, some of you are still working up to tenure. Justin just got tenure. I know how busy you are. You're probably balancing 4, 5, 6 projects right now at different stages, and publishing and teaching. So you have to really be good at balancing all of these things. And I know from experience that public criminology takes work. It's an investment. Social media is an investment. Talking to the press is an investment. Do your departments and your university, do they reward this type of work? Natalie.
I think I see a lot of appreciation from my university and from my department for this type of work. It might not always be immediately evident as in terms of, you know, a pay bump or anything like that, but I get the sense that, you know, anything that I ask for is often, they try to work with me because they respect that I put the UAB name out in the media, and it's, you know, I contribute to the, you know, the legitimacy and the productivity of the university. So I get the sense that my university really values that I am there and I am pushing the Department of Criminal Justice and the university as a whole forward. So that I'm not sure if that.
That's perfect. Andrea, how about you? Does Georgetown and your department specifically, do they reward public criminology?
So I'm new to Georgetown, right? Before this, I was at Ohio State for a year, and before that, doing a postdoc at Berkeley. And so what I will say is I can't necessarily speak to the reward question yet, but what I can say is they definitely support it. And I think that it will turn into rewards. And so even though I just started over summer, when I was still transitioning, there were a lot of different media outlets contacting me, and immediately my dean put me in contact with like our media support team, and we did informal trainings, and they pushed me out there even more, and they wanted to kind of, you know, like help me, but also help them, right? Like brand an expert in this area. And so I think there's a lot of support around that. And I'm hoping that, you know, when it comes to like more traditional and formal rewards, if you will, like kind of they will go hand in hand when we're thinking about tenure. But I do think you're right with regards to like, there is a lot of work that goes around this and a lot of time it takes to prepare to do these types of things. So.
Justin, how about you?
Yeah, so my school is housed in the College of Public Affairs and Community Service. And so my dean and the faculty here are very committed to engaging with the community. I can say that at every stage of the review process, you know, my tenure file, people mentioned my engagement with the media, my willingness to talk to the press. So I know that it's valued. It is an investment, like you said, you know, we take time out of our day, and often journalists are working on tight timelines. So, you know, where we might email a colleague and say, hey, get back to me next week. Sometimes I'm finding that journalists email me and they're like, I got a deadline in an hour. Can you talk to me? And we have to drop everything, you know, if we want to take that opportunity. And sometimes there's this uncomfort where they're not asking about something that's quite in our realm of expertise, but we feel, you know, maybe we're comfortable enough to take the call. So it can be a little scary, and it can be disappointing when you take that time, you drop what you're doing, and then you don't get quoted. I had a friend at another university speak to the AP recently. And, you know, they kind of talked about what he told them, but they didn't quote him. And, you know, I just said, hey, you know, it's frustrating, but you'll have other opportunities. And I think overall, I think it's a net positive. I think it's worth the investment, even if you don't get quoted. It's a good way to build that network, and, you know, the reporter is likely to remember you and call upon you again. So I think that, I don't know what the norm is, but I know my university values it, and it's definitely worth my time.
Great. Michael.
I think it's to build on what others have said. I think that it's especially informally valued. I think colleagues like to see their colleagues getting some kind of spotlight. I think universities, particularly admin, like to have the masthead of their university in national news outlets of various kinds, local news outlets. I think that, and this is advice that I've gotten particularly from senior colleagues, and it might be generational, but media engagement is an additional thing. As Andrea mentioned, there's usually years of work that go into any one quote, right? That article took years. It took reviews. It took all kinds of stuff to put you into a position to get quoted for 80 characters in an article. And so generally those things go hand in hand. So the people that are producing great work are those who are in the best position to leverage that in a public context. But when rubber meets road, particularly at research intensive universities, and we're all here at those kinds of institutions, you know, being in the media a whole lot may not be what gets you across the finish line if you don't have the peer review to back it up. And that's just the game that we're in. Generally though, if you're in the media a lot, it's because you have the expertise and because you're producing those things. So they do tend to go in that direction, but particularly for junior scholars, I was advised, like, you need to make sure you have the publications. That's what's gonna matter most for you during those pivotal decisions in your career.
Yeah. Now, I know all of your mentors. This is aging me, but I'm personal friends with all of your mentors, and I like them all so much, and I've learned so much from all of them. Do you, and if you can answer this specifically or more generally or both, do you feel that you were mentored enough? Do we mentor young scholars enough in public criminology? Let's start with Michael again.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, my advisor personally, I studied under Andrew Papachristos at Yale, and he was in the Department of Sociology. He's now at Northwestern. And I think that Andy does a great job of public criminology. In some ways, I lucked into having an advisor who regularly was in WashPo. He's done New York Times, he's done Chicago Tribune, he's done local papers. And that was kind of what got me interested in the first place. In some ways, I saw that and I didn't really know another way of doing scholarship because I just saw him doing it all the time. And his mentorship was not only looking at my op-eds and teaching me how to write the hook and you don't need to cite this, drop this, no one cares about that. That's a skill in and of itself. Was also advising me to pull back. Said you need to do your work. Like, the work has to happen before you keep writing these op-eds, because right now you're summarizing a lot of other people's work. What about your work? That's the op-ed you want to write when your paper drops, and you can say, I'm the expert, this is my work, and you can plant your position. And I had that advisorship. I had that kind of mentorship from Andy, definitely.
Okay, great, thank you. Justin, how about you?
So I was a product of team mentorship, starting with, Jeff Alpert, who's been around for decades, as I like to say. Scott Wolf was actually an assistant professor at USC at the time when he was doing my dissertation, and Jeff Rojek was a mid-career associate professor. So they all kind of play a hand in shaping my thinking about the world and academia and dealing with the media. So, Jeff Alpert, with all of his connections, has always been great about, providing me with opportunities, referring reporters to me, getting my feet wet like that. And he was always very good about, helping me craft op-eds and, telling me to get to the point and stop beating around the bush. But I will say that I think that, I consider that my good fortune, right? But if I think back to the other students around me and our cohorts that were going through at the time, it's not like we ever had any formal training in conversing with the media. I don't remember any workshops being put on. We certainly didn't have any classes. And so I know that that's something that I've heard people express interest in, and I know that the Crime and Justice Research Alliance puts on those workshops at the ASC meetings every year. I don't know how well attended those are, but I do see that as something that I could have used more formalized training in. Caitlin, I think is her name, who works with CJRA, she reached out one time when I was getting ready to publish a paper that we thought was going to get some press, and she had these very pointed, like, here are 3 things you need to go into every interview thinking about, right? What's your message? The reporter's always going to ask at the end, like, what have I not asked, or what do you want to conclude with? And that's your opportunity to really circle back to your points that you want to emphasize. And these are things that I don't know that you would just sort of organically figure out maybe until you've done many interviews, right? So I think maybe as a field, we probably could use some more formalized training in talking to reporters.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrea, how about you?
Yeah, so I don't think that I have the good fortune of Michael and Justin, and I think I'm still learning really as I go. I think for me, it was more so kind of doing work and publishing, and then like at some point people recognizing, my name or referring my name to others, but that was like more informal mentorship. I think during my PhD program, there wasn't really anyone who I received kind of direct mentorship doing this type of thing. And so I was always interested in it, but I didn't have a model to follow. And so I think I would echo, I think, Justin's latter point of kind of like, and I think both Michael said this also, but like it's a skill like that you need to develop. And there is sort of what, you know, like how we talk about the hidden curriculum of academia, right? There's like this hidden curriculum of navigating public criminology, right? And I've heard at different types of conferences, even outside of criminal justice, strategies that people use to engage the media and even support at different universities, right? I think that's another thing, whether or not your university actually has formal support to encourage this type of work and assist you in this work, or if it's all on you, because that then also impacts the ways in which you engage, right? And so unfortunately, yeah, I'm learning as I'm going, and it's been an interesting ride.
Well, I think we're all sort of learning as we go, and especially now, because press it's not the same as it was, 5-10 years ago. Natalie, how about you?
So this conversation is causing me to be very self-reflexive, so I need to revise my answer to the first question. What motivated me to do public criminology? Well, like Michael said, I was trained by Mike White, and I didn't really think of any other way to do research other than to be out there in the community. Mike trained me in every way in my career, and every step of the way we were talking to agencies about the work we were doing. We were talking to media. I was asking questions about, how do I phrase this? What do I do? And I've seen the CrimCon interview with you and Mike about public criminology, and he was sharing those tips with me every step of my PhD. Prepare your response in advance, make sure that you kind of stay in your lane and talk about what you do know, and talk about, admit when you don't know the answer to the question. But primarily it was just encouraging me to talk to people about my work every step of the way. And I guess I didn't really realize why I wasn't doing it. I was just doing it because that was the role model that I had that was so engaged with getting the research out there. So that, I guess, was my motivation to do it.
Well, thank you. And I think, Andrea, I didn't really have a mentor either to mentor me in this. So I just sort of watched my colleagues that were doing it a lot and learned more, I think, from my peers than any direct mentorship. And that led to a lot of missteps along the way too. And speaking of missteps, we've talked about a lot of the positives and a little bit of the negatives, but I want to hone in on that because I think we'd be remiss not to do that if we're talking to early career researchers about public criminology. What are some of the risks? I mean, I know you all have horror stories to share. Maybe we'll start with Justin here.
Yeah, why not? I think to me the biggest negatives that jump out, right, is the risk of being misquoted. There's an art to it. You need to really think about what you're saying, because it's very easy for journalists, with all the good faith in the world, to misrepresent what you say. So you have to be very, very intentional about what you say. And it is what it is. We have trolls in this world, and I've dealt with that in the past, but this summer was probably the worst in that respect. And it never really bothered me. I mean, it did early on, where you've got to fight the temptation to write back to the commenters on your article, right? Jeff Rozek in particular was really good at reminding me, just delete it and move on, don't worry about it. And, for years it didn't bother me. But then this summer, it took an ugly turn where it was no longer just, oh, he's an idiot, what does he know? I've been a cop for 40 years. What do you know? You've never been a cop. But this summer, and I posted about it on Twitter. I was very open about it. Some guy who lives here in the area, said that he hopes that protesters find where me and my family live and beat us to death. And, hope that the cops don't show up to save me. And I don't know, that really struck a nerve with me. And, I hope that others haven't had to deal with that. I'm sure others have, but it's sad that that's the world that we live in now. But again, it's something where you just got to kind of let it roll off your shoulders and remember all of the good things that can come from speaking to the media. And, live and learn, I guess. But yeah, that's obviously a risk involved with when you put yourself out there, you invite criticism and ugly nastiness.
Yeah. Natalie, how about you?
So in terms of the work effort, doing public criminology is just a lot more work than, if you decide to stay in your office and write your work and kind of stay low under the radar. Even just voicing your opinion on Twitter, inevitably, I feel like every time I write something, I get a request to do something. So, oh, you have a critique with how I'm doing something? Join my board, write this book chapter for me. So you just have to get very good about managing your time if people are giving you opportunities, and, you know, make sure that in addition to the work that you're doing to engage with the public and communities, you're balancing it with your work that, you know, pays the bills and produces. I think the biggest con for me is the emotional toll that doing this type of, you know, public engagement has, especially, I mean, I study policing in particular. It's a socially charged topic, and I'm passionate about it. And what you're doing is you're going out there and you're contradicting these very deeply ingrained beliefs and even social identities that people have sometimes, and that that can cause a lot of people to feel strongly about things and to push back really hard. So I think for me, it's a tough balance between getting out there and then also stepping back and taking a break. And I don't know what the ideal balance is. Maybe Aili, you can give us some advice on that, but I find myself spending a day out there and then spending a week taking a break from it, because it is so much effort and emotional toll on me personally. So
you met me, right? And asking me about balance is probably not a good I can refer you to some people that are much better at it than I am.
Thank you.
Michael, how about you? What are the risks? Any horror stories?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been relatively lucky. My first really obvious one that Justin's referring to, I was accused of being part of like the Soros cabal this past summer. That was the first one that I really remember. And there's stuff in the comments. Don't read the comments. That's just general advice. Don't read the comments. There's no reason to go in there. There's never any good reason to go in there. I've actually gotten a lot of positive responses on via email from some former officers. And I also study policing, and a lot of them are saying things like, yeah, I've been saying this forever. This is what I've been thinking. And so that's been positive. I think one of the real risks, sort of alluding to what Natalie was saying, was not just the emotional toll of kind of putting yourself out there. It can be a lot of work with no real payoff. You know, I've pitched op-eds that I've thought carefully about and really cared about and agonized over, because I thought this is going to be in front of potentially way more people than anything I will ever write in an academic press or an academic journal. And then it goes nowhere. The cycle moves on. That window where you can hit on something is actually quite small. And so the risk, the danger, is that you dump a lot of time into this thing that you have every good intention, but pushing it. You want to get out there in that conversation, and suddenly nothing comes of it. And so suddenly you're a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and all those other things that you sort of depend on professionally. Again, the coin of the realm for us is going to be research products. Those things have kind of taken a sideline. And so that's a very real risk that is very salient for early career researchers. And then sometimes even after all that work, then all the negative stuff happens. So it's just emotionally trying. And the shift mentally to go from doing research to writing public stuff is not without cost. It takes time, it takes energy to make that shift and to do it effectively, I think.
Yeah, it is such a skill, isn't it? Going from writing in an academic journal to writing an op-ed, or writing just short little one-page papers that get to the practitioners. It's a completely different writing style. It's actually a writing style I enjoy way more, reading and writing, but it's a skill. Andrea.
Yeah, so I would agree with everything said. I have a couple of things just to add. I want to circle back to the point that was brought up about a responsibility for me. I think when I first started, I just felt like such a weight that, like, I do work in policing. I think we all do work in policing, but I look at policing and race in particular, and like the weight I feel, you know, to make sure that I don't say something that, one, is obviously, you know, like inaccurate or can be taken the wrong way, but also because I focus on race and as a woman of color, like I think that there's another responsibility that I have. And I think that internal struggle is real, that like doesn't often get talked about enough. That aside though, I think also there was one time that I was doing this past summer. It was like a live news, and it was my first live news. And I was like, I'm just gonna say yes. You know, I'm gonna keep saying yes. That was what I was doing all summer, is just saying yes. And so technology failed me. So it just did not turn out the best. Like half my face was cut off, just like little things that I didn't necessarily prepare for. And so I think just making sure that you are like well prepared, have different things in place. I got these AirPods actually because of that. And so like there was a problem with the sound, and there was just all of these things. And so I think that could be a material investment that is required if you want to have, depending on how far you want to go and engage. And then the only thing I will say, the last thing I will say is, with regards to the emotions, when I did the kind of live and video recordings, there was one time where they played a police shooting incident that I had not yet seen, and I intentionally didn't see, and they played it right before they asked me the question, and it like struck some emotions for me, having not seen it and not knowing that they were gonna play it. And then when they started asking me questions, like I had to catch myself, because I was like, okay, I'm here to talk about the science, and like this is obviously striking emotions for me, and like how to balance that in like an instant was definitely an interesting, you know, challenge, if you will. And so I think even thinking about those things, obviously you can't prepare for everything, but I think having some practice, you know, like engaging with different types of questions and all of that ahead of time, and kind of being prepared for anything really matters. So
yeah, no, you've all touched on such great stuff, and really I think that emotional toll that it takes on all of us is unexpected, isn't it? You think you're just going to try to drop that perfect soundbite and they're going to take it, and you might get misquoted, but it's going to be more of a professional toll if that happens. But a lot of us sit there and we agonize about something we've said, or we just, especially being on social media, you agonize maybe about something you've written and you got positive reactions, but then that one negative reaction that you got just eats away at you for days, and you take a break and you come back refreshed and the cycle starts again. So you've been doing this throughout the entire interview already, but I really do want to pick up, because I think you guys are just so good at this so early in your career. Do you have advice for other early career researchers that are hoping to start engaging the press, that are out there in social media, that want to be better public criminologists? Andrea, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, so two pieces of advice. One is tailored to if you are just kind of, if you are early in your career, but like thinking about someone in a PhD program and starting research. I think asking a question that matters, whether it matters to practitioners or leaders or the public broadly speaking, right? Like making sure that like the whatever research question you're asking is of importance and relevance to them, I think is also helpful when you're trying to think maybe long term of like, will this then be public facing at any point, right? Could this be leveraged for a public facing opportunity? The second thing that I would say is, if you are in a place where you feel like you don't have the actual, you know, mentorship or example, kind of direct model, if you will, of someone that you can, you know, always go to, that I think you should just reach out to people that, you know, like you've saw their name quoted or cited a lot or what have you in news articles or in op-eds, or who's active on Twitter. I've found that people are very welcoming and friendly and always willing to, you know, chat or what have you. And then I think that also opens up doors in the future, because it puts your name on their radar too, as like someone who's interested in this space. So
fantastic advice. Michael, how about you?
So one piece of very concrete advice, usually for early grad students and people who are not experienced in writing op-eds, the OpEd Project is a nonprofit organization. It's catered specifically towards women of color and teaching them how to do op-eds and helping them place those op-eds. They have public resources, and it's everything from what is a lead, the format, the process. It's actually not intuitive how you submit op-eds. It's sort of like submitting peer review, where you don't send it to 7 places at once. Like you have to wait, and it's not clear if you wait 3 days or 1 week, and you actually kind of tell them ahead of time how long you're going to wait. So those kinds of things, like there is writing on that. You can find those resources. And so I do recommend the OpEd Project. I had some training from them very early on. On the note of journalists, if you read, so first you read more newspapers. I like the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, WashPo, New York Times. I do read the Wall Street Journal. I try to keep tabs on that. Local papers in Texas as well, Statesman, Chronicle, things like that. And just keep tabs on who writes the stories that you like, that you think are well done, and then follow them on Twitter. It's not weird to slide in the DMs of journalists and say like, hey, I have this paper, or just tell them you like the piece they wrote. They like that, and they can remember your name. They'll reach out if they know your name and they know your work. And for people who are starting out, I had success kind of pitching my first op-eds locally. Like it's great if your first op-ed that you ever get published is in the New York Times, but it's unlikely. The Hartford Courant is a perfectly reasonable place to publish an op-ed. The New England Register, both places where I in graduate school was pitching op-eds, and then from there you get your practice, you make your bones, and you get better at it. You get better at writing those things, and so I think there's a rush, and I know it because I felt it. I wanted to hit the New York Times like in graduate school. I thought that was the goal. And instead, like that can come with time. And it's perfectly reasonable to operate locally. And in some cases, some of the most impactful stuff you can do is local. Because the mayor is going to see it. The police chief is going to read that paper and is going to see that kind of thing. And so for the early op-ed writers, there's nothing wrong with going local and working at those smaller scales.
Great. More excellent advice. Justin.
Yeah, that's great points made so far. And I would just add to it, Michael mentioned the OpEd Project. At our conferences, look for those workshops. The CJRA puts one every year. Attend those workshops and get that formal training that some of us, I think all of us maybe wish that we would have had in some form. Get on social media. It can be a powerful tool. There's some ugliness that goes with it for sure, but you've got to promote yourself. If you don't, who will? So it's a risk, and it can be, you're making yourself vulnerable, and you might feel uncomfortable putting your work out there where you're inviting criticism. But I think it's well worth it, and it can pay off because, I can't count the number of people whose work I've been exposed to that I otherwise probably wouldn't have if not for seeing a tweet about it. So I think it's just such a powerful tool. I think you got to kind of pick your spots, whether you're writing an op-ed or you're potentially getting set up to do an interview. Again, it's just knowing what you're comfortable speaking about and what you're not comfortable speaking about. And I think we have a responsibility to, decline respectfully. So you know what, that's just outside of my realm, but you might go call Andrea or Natalie. They would be much more knowledgeable on the subject, right? And I think that's probably the right way to go. So it's just knowing what the answer to that question is, depending on what it is you're being asked to do. If you're getting ready to take an interview, one practice I do is I try to jot down a few notes. So, usually a reporter will reach out ahead of time and say, this is kind of what my story is about. Here's what I'm thinking. Could we maybe talk later today? And I think that gives you a sense of what are the major points that run through your mind as you read that, right? And I try to jot them down because sometimes these conversations, they turn into conversations, right? And it's easy to get sidetracked. And I like to have a few points to look at to remind me what do I think is important to hit when I get a chance. And then, lastly, just it's hard, but try not to let the trolls bother you.
Yeah, great advice. Natalie, you want to close us out?
Sure. I think as a graduate student and as an early career researcher, you have one thing that's really going for you, and that's kind of your anonymity. And I used that to my advantage for years because I wanted to practice. So I said yes to a lot of kind of, university papers or online websites and things like that. And I practiced kind of, not sounding socially awkward when I talk on a video or, getting my points nailed down so that I didn't talk too long, just make sure I have my bumper sticker, the things that I want to say. So I use that to my advantage. And maybe if you Google my name and a couple years ago, you'll find some weird things that I said, but I was using those to practice to get better because I did want to get good at this so that I could say yes when I was asked about something that was a little bit outside of my realm of expertise, but that I could still talk to. And related to that, something that I'm still working on right now is taking on things that aren't necessarily way out of my wheelhouse, but not, something that I've written a dissertation on. I recently did something for al.com, Alabama's kind of main media website, on citizen advisory boards. And it's not necessarily something that I study, but it's something that I do know about and think about. So I did a quick, you know, a lit review, not 15-minute lit review, thought about things that I already heard, and I was able to give them, you know, a couple quotes for the article. So you do, as a criminal justice PhD or a public affairs PhD, you do have the ability to put together some information that's evidence-based in a relatively short amount of time that other people can still benefit from, because that's your skill. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to, yes, you should stay in your lane and not try to talk to things that you don't have expertise on. But if it is tangential, I try to do that because I can put together some information on it that will help the community. So
great. Well, this has been so much fun, and I knew that you guys were the right people to ask, because you gave so much amazing, really, pieces of advice that I think a lot of people are going to benefit from. So thank you. Good luck this semester. I hope you guys, you know, we make it through 2020. I'm not convinced we all will, but it's been so much fun. So thank you.
thanks, Aili.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.